Morning. How are you? How's the conference been for everybody so far? Pretty good? Yeah, I just saw Wayne and Neil's session on availability groups. That looked fairly complicated, but very cool. My name is Ben Curry. I am from the stateside with Summit 7 Systems. We're a SharePoint consulting firm in the U.S., and we do this for a living, so we do a lot of SharePoint. We have several 2013 implementations already in place, so if you have some questions, if I don't know the answer, I'll just tell you I don't know the answer, but don't be afraid to ask. I'm a really laid-back guy. I'm from Alabama. In Alabama, we move a little bit slower. It doesn't mean we're stupid, though. I don't have a television show about me yet, but you never know. That day could come. And I do love SharePoint, and a lot of you know I've written several books for Microsoft. A lot of you have owned the books, so thank you very much for all of the ones you've purchased. I have a new book coming out. It will be by Sam's. I did switch publishers, so no longer with Microsoft. I wanted a larger format book, so it's going to be a SharePoint 2013 administration guide, so it'll be much larger, full administration guide to 2013. If you can find my Twitter, it's Curry Ben. If you have something good to say, tweet it. Otherwise, please don't. And you can get my email address, and I do return every email, so if you have a question about today, feel free to ask. Part of what this session is about today is SharePoint 2013, building out a server farm, and where do I put my services, and how do I architect it, and where do I put my applications and my application pools. How many people are running 2013 now? Wow, that's good. How many? 2010. Okay. How many people will not raise their hand today no matter what? Okay, thank you very much. I know who you are, so I don't know what you're running. You know, I think back to SharePoint 2007, and when we first started architecting for 2007, we thought it was fairly complex. The fact that we had query servers, and we had index servers, and we were propagating, and we had shares, and we had to have firewall ports open. We had timer jobs and a config DB. But then when we moved into 2007 all of a sudden seemed fairly simple, actually. 2010 brought this rich service application infrastructure, but that did complicate our farm architecture, and especially if we were trying to create security domains or zones between servers and putting firewalls between servers. As you're going to see today, the fewer firewalls you put between your farm, including SQL and your servers, the happier you are going to be. So there's one recommendation I will make from the beginning. I understand some of you must put firewalls in between these servers, but it is going to complicate your life, especially in the services layer. Our agenda, we'll talk about planning today. I know it's everybody's favorite part, but planning and documentation. We'll talk about some farm fundamentals. Guys, in the beginning, some of this is a 101 for you. Don't leave. We'll get deeper as the session goes on. But I do want to revisit some of the 101s. We'll talk about logical architecture and how that affects your farm topology. We'll talk about scaling web applications. I'll do a little bit of demystification around service applications, and especially around, I'll do a couple demonstrations and kind of show you how it works under the hood. I'm not going to go through every service application and how you architect for it. I'd rather show you how the bloody thing works, and then you can go home and figure the rest out. And then putting it all together in the end and how it might look. Some of the big changes in 2013. First, I would say that FAST is a huge change. The search architecture is completely changed. So you really have to take everything you knew about SharePoint 2010 search and throw it away. It's completely changed. Index servers don't mean index servers. Query servers don't mean query servers. Some of them kind of have the same name, but they don't perform the same function. So they're very different. Another big change is workflow has been moved off onto its own farm. I like this personally because it gives us real scale and a lot of flexibility. However, it's another server farm. Now, you follow me so far? We created a SharePoint 2013 server farm. We created a FAST service farm. We just now create a workflow manager service farm. And technically, guys, a workflow management farm is two farms. You have your workflow farm, and then you have a service bus around it, which has another config DB. So really, technically, at this point, I already have 4 farms. So some big changes in 2013. Office Web Apps now is also its own dedicated farm, and it must be off of SharePoint 2013, and that would actually give you technically 5 farms. So some big changes in 2013 if you decide to implement the entire stack. With the great flexibility we've gotten with the product, it's also become more complex. First thing we like to talk about is planning. I like the house of cards. I would say the majority of our clients to where we see SharePoint implementations that are totally cratered. Does that translate well? Hosed, trashed, gone. No planning was done. Basically, we put in the software, we mounted the ISO, I agreed, next, finish, and we installed SharePoint. And then, of course, it doesn't scale or map to our business. And we call that a house of cards, and eventually it will fall. It's just a matter of time if you didn't do planning. The favorite part of good farm architecture, I know we love to gather requirements. I know we don't like to gather requirements. I do this for a living, and I actually don't enjoy gathering requirements. I do know, though, that this is one of the most important phases of your design. Knowing what the business needs, knowing what your requirements are in a data center, talk to your developers, talk to your information architects, talk to your business analysts, find out what they need, and make a list. From that, we create our logical architecture. We do this. This is your URL taxonomy, our web applications, our home, our site collections, our sites, service applications. We do this before we start building out a server farm. Because once we have our logical architecture, then we can start to look at the required physical architecture to support it. One of the things we want to do in the very beginning and before we built our farm is let's talk about planning for availability. And one of the mistakes we see quite often is people plan for their RTO and RPO at the same time. So do you know the difference here? So the RTO is how long can my farm be offline, which is very different than the RPO or your recovery point objective, which is how much data can I afford to lose? 2 very different things. We have some customers who can't lose a second of data, but if the server goes down, it can be down a day. That's okay. That's a very different versus I can lose up to a day of data, but my server must always be online. See, they're 2 radically different things. And this will greatly affect your server design. Mostly it affects your SQL design and how you're doing SQL backups and restores. Test and validate, log and monitor, and adjust architecture. Tomorrow I will be doing a live session for administrators showing you how to test your server 2013 server farm for capacity. Every farm we build, we break. And now that's the fun part of my job. But every server farm we build, we break. The only way you know where your farm is going to break is to break it. Generally, then we back off 20% and we set our counters, and that's where we're looking at logs. I want to get an email, I want to get a text alert, but break every farm you create. If you have a new administrator, they'll do it anyway. My wife, I was doing this, she said, that's a snail. Why have you drawn a snail? I was sitting there in the hotel this morning drawing this picture. But one of the things I wanted to make sure everybody understood, we have a lot of, I call them cascading architectural decisions. Let me give you an example. The vice president of sales says, I need a business intelligence site that never goes down. You know the kind of BI site we're talking about. I mean, services are now more important than content in a lot of our customers. The dashboard's more important than the Word doc. The VP of sales, they're making business decisions based on this site. Well, this site can never go down. Well, let's go back. Think architecturally what that means to your farm. That means my site collection can never go down that site's hosted in. The content database that's hosting that site collection has to always be online. That means that SQL Server instance that's hosting that content database must always be online. And that's kind of one if you look over to the SQL side. Now look over to your servers. What if I'm looking at, Oracle, or I'm looking at SAP for my line of business system. That means that server must be online. And then that means my web servers have to be online. And that means my application servers that are hosting Performance Point. What I'm saying here is when you get a business requirement like my BI must always be online, don't just shake your head and say, it's easy. Think about the cascading architectural effects of that. I can't spend a lot of time on this today because we're talking about SharePoint 2013. However, SharePoint is only as good as the foundation it's built on. We put entire farms into virtualized environments all of the time. It's the natural evolution of where we're at today. SQL's virtualized, everything's virtualized. However, if your VMware or your Hyper-V infrastructure stinks, your SharePoint's going to stink. If you can't keep your ESX up, you won't keep, or vSphere, you won't keep SharePoint up. If your SQL Server DBA is also your IS administrator and your Active Directory administrator and your link administrator, you probably have problems. They're overworked. You never notice that you go into a business and they'll have 10 Oracle DBAs and 1 SQL DBA. SharePoint's only as good as SQL is. SQL Server is probably 70 to 98% of all of your SharePoint content. Somewhere in there, isn't it? I think I heard 77% of all statistics are made up on the spot. You can tag, it's a true fact. Same with your storage area network, storage frames. DAS is not a dirty word. There's nothing wrong with direct attached storage. We still use it all of the time. It's fast, it's easy. But things like authentication, database, perimeter, if you're pushing to the cloud, all of this still matters, but I'm not talking about this today. I'm putting this up here just to say, hey, don't forget this. When you go back and open this deck and start building a farm, take a look at this too. 3 URLs, these are really so you have them when you leave today. The first one is your hardware and software requirements. I want to make sure you have it. The second one is your boundaries, your software boundaries, and the third is your capacity planning guide. Now, I will tell you this third URL, if you want to know SharePoint 2013. You say, my goal is to learn SharePoint 2013. This third URL, read it and everything it's linked to. To read it straight through without nose diving into any of it, taking any deep dives, it will take you 85 hours. I did it and I timed it. Okay? This third will take you 85 hours. My recommendation, if you really are going to be an administrator, an IT pro in SharePoint 2013, you've got 85 hours of basic reading. This is the URL to go read before all the books and before everything else. Make notes of those links that you want to know more about and go do those later. But I highly recommend reading through it in one motion so you get an idea of how this thing feels and looks like. And you'll get this three-dimensional image of SharePoint 2013 by reading that URL. Hardware requirements. It needs a lot. Let's just say that, right? SharePoint 2013 will take all of the CPU and memory you can hand it. Remember Fast Search 2010? How much CPU and memory and IOPS did it take? A lot. So now that it's in 2013 SharePoint, do you think somehow magically it reduced the number of IOPS? No, of course it didn't. Fast still requires exactly now it's called SharePoint 2013 Search. It still requires all of those same huge IOPS, 2,000 IOPS for the volume where you're hosting some of your database, search databases. 64-bit, 4 cores the minimum across the board. Guys, if you're running vSphere, if you're running Hyper-V, do not share processors. Bad juju. I hope that translates over here too. That's bad. That's like, juju's like voodoo. Bad. If it says you need 4 cores, that's 4 dedicated cores. That means if you've got a host machine running 32 cores, you've dedicated 4 of those to this machine. I also highly recommend you do not share memory, dynamic memory sharing. Once again, bad. If you have huge drive throughput, you with me? Some of you will. Search, BI. You can even do pass-through disks, so don't run VHDs if you need a lot of throughput. Doesn't work. Do pass-throughs. iSCSI is a great way to do pass-through disks. If you're running a medium deployment, you probably need about a 24 gigabyte minimum. Here in a nutshell, let me tell you what we found in real world. I'm telling you what Microsoft's saying. Let me tell you what I found really. 12 gigabytes the footprint. You install SharePoint 2013, you put the average number of services and applications, just there is an average, it's about 12 gigabyte. So anything less than 12 gigs, too little. Now, what I found is going from 12 gig to 16 gig buys me a lot. Going from 16 to 24 buys me a lot. But going from 8 to 12, it runs crappy either way. So pretty much, in 2013, think 12 gigabytes, and that's kind of your memory footprint of the system. Some differences, I know Mr. Webster's up here in the front row. Search, yes, can take a lot more than 12. And it can take a lot more than 12. We'll get there. SQL servers, 64-bit, 4-core minimum. Across the board, the system drive must be 80 gigabytes. And this is important because if your system drive is not 80 gigabytes, Microsoft will not take your support call. I know a lot of you like to create system drives that are 30, 40 gigabytes because you're virtualized. Doesn't matter. If you want to be in support with Microsoft, it's 80 gigabytes. Things like solution deployments, feature installs, those take up room. Let's get on to memory. 16 gigabyte for SQL. Standalone with SQL. Nobody here is going to do standalone. Don't do standalone, right? The first thing in here is we say don't smoke crack. One of the worst things you can do in SharePoint 2013 is choose this second one called standalone, used for trial or development environments. Don't even use it for development environments. It's a different set of bits. The product doesn't behave the same way. You can't scale the farm. Even some of your developers' code won't run the same way. If you need a single server, install SQL Server Standard on that box, then install SharePoint on the same box. Whatever you do, don't run standalone. We're going to run complete every time to build our server farm. Now, once we've done that, we always get this thing, specify file locations. You're like, Ben, you said this was a common sense approach to architecture. Well, think of this through. It's a common mistake. If I said my default location is E program files, and I have a 4-server farm, what drive do I need on all 4 servers? E. Seems simple, right? If I create an IIS site and I put that on F drive and 2 servers have an F and 2 don't, and I start getting errors on the other 2, why is that? Oh, I don't have an F drive. So the lesson to learn off this screen is your servers must all look alike. If you've got to have a C drive, a D drive, an F drive, you've got to have them. The great thing about SharePoint, and especially 2013, it works brilliant, is that I can make a change in one place and it replicates everywhere, if everywhere exists. So make sure that our drive volumes are the same across the servers in our farm. Search servers could be the exception. You may need more or less. And then we get this screen that says, create a new server farm. What is this really saying here? Am I really creating a 4-server farm? No. I'm creating a new configuration database. When this says, this really should say, do I want to connect to an existing configuration database, or would you like to create a new configuration database? That's really what this screen is saying. It really has very little to do with a server farm at all. And then we're off to see the wizard. This is a wonderful wizard of insert joke there. I couldn't find anything that translated to UK, so I left ... The wizard's not totally evil here. The wizard's going to give you some defaults I don't like where your my sites are hosted. It's going to put, do you guys say GUIDs or GUIDs here? GUIDs, okay. All right. So it's going to put these really ugly GUIDs on all your database names, but the thing will work. It does some really nice things for you automatically. It automatically turns on features for the content type hub and turns on features in publishing sites and wires it all up magically. However, most of what we're doing is we're PowerShelling all of our installs today. There's some sessions here around PowerShell. Highly recommend it. You can go out to the internet and find PowerShell scripts. One of the other things to think about here is configuring your trace logs. And I'm only saying this because more than once I've answered a support call and we're out of drive space. Why are we out of drive space? And it's trace logs. Someone's went in and took all categories and set to verbose, so that every single transaction on this farm is being logged to disk, and the disk runs out of space. Once again, a really simple checklist. You can have this deck after this. Really simple checklist of things to look when you're building your farm. This will kill your farm and kill it fast. Also, if on your logs you said that was F drive, guess what you need on every server in the farm? F drive, once again. Same place, just make sure whenever you change the defaults from C, which I highly recommend changing from C, we'll see how smart you guys are. If your system drive fills up, is that good or bad? Okay, it's bad. I highly recommend changing off of C. Hey, think about everything that goes to C by default. Well, we know our trace logs, we know our event logs. We saw index went there by default. We saw Excel services caches there by default. Access services caches there by default. IIS caches there by default. Yick. So I highly recommend moving off C, but when you create that other drive, make it consistent. There's no reason you can't share this F drive for a lot of these other services as well. Things like, Excel services caching and your logs and your IIS logs could all be on the F drive. By the way, I like to put mine on the L drive because it starts with L, logs. So let me actually, I don't have time for that, so I'm going to move on. Let's talk about the logical architecture some and how this affects your farm. We are going to get to the farm architecture. I'm going to give you an example. I just built 5 service applications. I use PowerShell. Sorry, that's a bad joke, I get it. I have a managed metadata 1, performance point, user profiles, BCS, secure store, really common. How many people have built service apps here? Yeah, okay. Let's build a web application. And in this example, I'm building a web application, and I'm calling it critical. And in that, I host my critical business functions, things like human resources and enterprise search and customer onboarding and my BI portal for all the executives to see the coolness of SharePoint and their systems. So a really critical. And what we're going to do is we're going to associate it with all 5 of those service applications, right? So here's our critical web app, and I'm getting all of these critical service applications. I'm going to come in now and create a Teams tier. I'm not saying you have to go back and architect this way. This is an example. So you can go back and in your head, you'll say, okay, I kind of see how to architect a farm based on my logical architecture. And what we can do is come in and create a second managed metadata. And what we'll do is we'll wire up Teams to user profiles in managed metadata 2. But it doesn't get managed metadata 1. It's not associated with BCS or secure store. This is kind of our first layer of technical governance in SharePoint 2013. Changing the associations from the web application to the service applications, a really simple way to secure the teams from any of the critical taxonomy. Common examples there, gas and energy, banking, anywhere there's intellectual property in the noun taxonomy. It's really, really common that there's IP in that taxonomy itself. We don't want down where subcontractors or contractors might be at. We may put that in a critical or Uber IP web application. Then we come down here and build the My Sites. How many people like My Sites? How many people love to manage My Sites? Nobody. I have not a single person. I'm not a huge My Sites fan. I'll say it out loud, right up front. I love social. I love profiles. Not a huge My Site fan. Actually, one of the best reasons I think to create My Sites is if you want to further fragment your data and make things impossible to find. If that's your goal, I like My Sites. Not at all cynical at all. And then your extranet, which what's in our extranet, we have no idea because vendors are there, partners are there. We now have this authentication with Windows Live. We actually don't even know who's authenticating to our extranet. So I tell you what I'm going to give them. I'm going to give them user profile service application and nothing else. See, it's a really easy way to secure those web applications because they're not associated with the service apps at all. So this is kind of service architecture 101. We call this the BFOC, the bucket full of chaos. It's a little bit different every place we go. Okay, I love seeing hands go up, so here's user participation. How many of you think you need at least 50% of the stuff on your file shares? There's 2. I'll take it. We don't, do we? And why don't we delete all of the stuff on our file shares? Not my problem. I didn't own it. I inherited it. If I delete it, it's missing. I have no idea. Am I violating some regulatory? I'm sure, but not my problem. I'm the SharePoint guy. If you don't plan in SharePoint, you're just going to get the same. You're going to get a BFOC in SharePoint as well. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm saying all we're going to do is we're carving out a BFOC from the very beginning. And I know the purists don't like this, but we know there's going to be some places we're not going to apply a lot of governance. We'll get to physical architecture next. But you say, Ben, that's my name. I already have some critical site collections and sites, and I need to protect those today. And how do I architect that? We upgraded to SharePoint 2013, and today I want to be able to protect those sites. Well, we can do that by moving those into dedicated content databases in the very beginning. So taking those critical site collections outside of a tiered architecture, say I can't do that, or that's too sophisticated for us. There is a lot of configuration management there. I can take, and you see the CEO of my site's in its own content database? That's not uncommon. It's real world, right? I live in a real world where real customers and executives are above everybody else, really. So just remember, so many of our service applications and our content databases, our site collections, are SQL-based. What if I was taking my customer onboarding database and snapshotting it maybe every 2 hours? And when somebody hoses up that site collection and trying to go to my backup restore tools in SharePoint, what if I detached it, restored in SQL, reattached it? I'm talking 30 seconds and I'm back online. So just some ideas about architecting this and not just depending upon SharePoint, but also taking a look at SQL, which can be our best friend and our worst enemy. Web application architecture, some of you know this already. Web application architecture is simply an empty bucket with at least one content database. If I create a web application and I browse to it, what do I get in the browser? 404, page not found. Do you agree? Create a web application, nothing else. I browse to it, I get a 404, page not found. It's an empty bucket. SharePoint 2010 and 2013, we can have up to 300 content databases per web applications. Wow, that's a lot. I'm not saying you should. Because you can doesn't mean you should. 300, and I've seen databases supported up to 4 terabytes. Use some common sense here. 300, 4 terabyte content databases is bad. Right? So you may have a few databases that are 300, 400, 500 gigabytes, and you may have this one that's 4 terabytes because it's our records archive. By the way, that's where we see really big stuff. It's electronic health records repositories. That's okay. It's not really heavily used. It's read, mostly write. The way we get content in a web application, most of you know this, I'm going to say it again, is a site collection. This is how I don't get a 404 page not found, and I get some really cool Uber content that our developers are going to help us with when they write some code. You know how many developers it takes to change a light bulb? They won't. It's a hardware problem. It's our fault. It's our problem. A site collection lives in a single content database. Can a site collection span 2 content databases? No. I wish it could. There's a lot of times this would help us a lot when we're architecting big data, but as it is, it cannot. A site collection must live completely in a content database. Let's go back to the business requirement. If the business comes to you and says, I've got this electronic, let's see, I got a widget repository that's fantastical. I don't even know what that means. I just made that up. And it is going to be a terabyte. And we're going to put that in a single library. How large will the content database be hosting that? It'll be at least, 2 terabytes or whatever the size is, because it must live in a single content database. By the way, if you do that, use the records library, not a document library. It's about 4 to 10 times faster. Side tip, we do all the time now. Really big repositories, it's because it doesn't do any content, metadata promotion, demotion. So it's a whole lot faster than the document library. Now, I can have lots of other site collections, and those can share. I can have, I think it's like 20,000 site collections in a single database, which I don't understand who would possibly do that, but I think technically it's possible. It's limitless. So where does this touch your performance of your farm? Tomorrow we're going to get into details in the last session of tomorrow about how we test this. But the sites themselves, the way the users touch our farm is via the application pool. The application pool is on our web servers. What's the difference between a web server and an application server? I can think of two reasons, really two things. The foundation web the web service on server and DNS. I mean, basically that's it, right? There really is no difference between an app server and a web server, especially in SharePoint 2013. They're all the same. It depends on what you turn on or off. I think the other thing we look at, and that's Horde. I do not know why that turned white, but it is SQL Server. Question.
Is there a limitation for number of application pools that we can have in SharePoint?
Yeah, the limit of his question is a number of application pool is 10. The limit is still 10. Yeah, as far as I know, unless there's been some update, and I don't think there has, it's 10. And it's not a hardware issue. You can't throw 64 gig of RAM and overcome it. It's a software boundary, not a hardware boundary. 10. In fact, Microsoft 2013, don't shoot the messenger, they recommend a single web application per farm and use hostname site collections for everything else. That's the recommendation. All I can say is repeat it. I'm going to be quiet on that. I'm going to go over here. I actually have a running SharePoint farm. I think. Oh, you know what I didn't do? I probably should do. My power's about to run out. See, I did that just to see if you guys would notice. I was going to give away a $100 gift certificate to whoever noticed first. I was like, this sure doesn't run no slow. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go into central administration. Now, when I'm building out a service farm or SharePoint farm, and I'm clicking buttons inside of central administration, where am I changing at? Am I changing directly on any server? No. Every button I'm clicking inside of central administration, I'm changing a bit in a database. All I am is flipping a bit in a database. Even if it's on the server that I'm on right now, I'm making that change in a database. I then have this handy-dandy service job running. SharePoint timer job. We'll see it. SharePoint timer. No, we're looking for the admin timer job. I'll find it later. And what it's doing, do you might have kids in here? I have kids, 7-year-old, 9-year-old. And we drive on trips. The first hour goes pretty well because they have Nintendo DSs or they have movies. Hour number 2, though, maybe it was a 2-hour movie. Hour number 3, what do they ask next? Are we there yet? That's exactly right. Well, SharePoint works in much the same way. When I'm in central administration and I change a bit here, I make a change in the configuration database. Every 30 seconds, every server in the farm pings the configuration database and says, any changes? Nope, okay. 30 seconds later, are we there yet? Any changes? No. 30 seconds later, any changes? Why, yes. App 2 is now in Excel services. Okay, I'm going to copy everything to the registry and everything for that service app proxy into my machine so I know how to connect to it now. See how this works. This is how the architecture updates work in 2010 and 2013. We make all of our changes, whether it's PowerShell, whether it's central admin in the configuration database, the servers all talk to it and pick up the synchronization. You can see some of this in system settings. I'm going to go to Manage Services on Server. This is just too much fun. One person should have it a day. And I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this on a different box. Let's go over here to my front end, 0115. This will be even more fun. By the way, who's running 2012 server? Who likes it? Dude, I'm digging it, right? Because I didn't know this, right? So the first thing, all you have to know is the Windows key. So hit the Windows key and just start typing and hit return, and it just magically appears. I think it's wonderful. Anyway, so I'm going to go in here to System Settings, Services on Server. I'm going to double check, by the way, common mistake. Oh, I see this happen in production all the time. Oh, I hit the wrong server. Even just double check that you've selected the correct server here. And I'm going to choose FE01. That's for front end. It's a web front end. All right, before I do that, I'm going to show you a couple other cool things. I'm going to open up IIS Mangler. And if you've got an untrained administrator, that's what they do. And you see all of my sites here. Nothing up my sleeves. I didn't wear any. Oh, and let's do this. And by the way, if you hit the Windows key, you can hit like C:, and it'll pull up your drive. Ooh. Ah. So if I go in iNet pub, www.root, WSS, virtual directories, that's where your SharePoint stuff's at, right? Do you know that? Ah, I see. People, portal, and port 80. Cool. Those are my 3 websites. Now, I said, I'm going to go back here. I go into Central Administration. I make a change. Where did I make the change? Configuration database. I don't know who said that, but they were right. Now, within theoretically 30 to 60 seconds, the server picks it up and makes the change internally. Now, let me show you this. So we're on FE01. You can see FE01's hard drive. FE01's IIS. Over here in Central Administration, I'm going to go over to FE01. You still with me here? This is fun stuff. And you see this, I had this Microsoft SharePoint Foundation web application, and it is started on FE01. I could come in and stop it. Now, am I stopping IIS on that box? No. What am I doing? Yeah, I'm going to the configuration database and saying FE01 no longer hosts this role. So what's going to happen? Well, let's go show you. So let's stop. Are you sure you want to stop this? Yes, I am. So we're going to hit stop here. Now, somewhere between 30 and 60 seconds, this server is going to go out to config.db and said, even though it's itself, it says, hey, I'm FE01. I'm no longer a web server. Oh, well, you don't need these directories. I'm going to delete them for you. Oh, in IIS, we go to IIS. Right, I'm going to go hit refresh on sites. Guess what? Oh, it pulled out my IIS sites too. Oh, I had some in the web config. Oh, and I had signed IP addresses. Oh, and I had multiple host headers in there. And my SSL certificates were bound. Yep. You know where they went? They're gone. One of the things I want you to take away from here in farm architecture is be well-trained, number one. But understand that when we're making changes in PowerShell or central administration, that you're making changes in a database. SharePoint Smart. This isn't just this one service, guys. This is the same with Search, Excel Services, Project Server, anything you're touching inside of 2013 architecture. When I make a change via PowerShell or Central Admin, the cascading changes of that could be, well, either really great or really bad. SharePoint's like being married. I love being married, don't get me wrong, right? You go into SharePoint and let's take content types. I love the fact that I can go in and make a single change and affect 1,000 things under it with a click of a button. What's the downside to that? Well, I go to one place, click a single button, affect thousands of things under it. So the things we love the most about SharePoint is the stuff we hate the most. That's why I say it's kind of like marriage. If you try to fix the stuff on your spouse you don't like, you end up breaking the stuff you love the most. SharePoint's really that way as well. Now, we can use what I just showed you to our advantage. When I show up to a client and they've had newbie dev or admin in there hosing around with their IIS and web config, how long do you think I try to fix that? About 5 minutes. Because what I'm going to do is turn this role off, let it clean itself up. What happens when I turn it back on? Oh, magic. It's just magic now. I make a change in configuration database. I'm going to start. I will give you a heads up. It takes longer to build than rebuild. See, all of this is stored in the configuration database. My iNet pub directories, my IIS config, my search config, everything's in that configuration database. That configuration database is the heart and soul of your farm. Lose that configuration database, you're dead. You know, your kidneys are project server, your lungs may be search, but the config DB is the heart. Pull out the heart, you're done. So this will start rebuilding those apps, I hope. All right. You guys get the idea. Be careful. God, what if that was a search server? And I said, well, this is hosting a replica of the index. And I went in and said, this server is no longer a search server. Guess what happened? Oh, no. That was like I had 30 million items in that index and 3 partitions, and they're all gone. So as we move through this, now, who did SharePoint 2003? Where we had like search and SharePoint, and well, that was it. And IIS, we didn't have much else to it really, unless you were one of those few people that had to integrate Project 2003, which I did, which was kind of like pulling your fingernails out with a pair of pliers. Is kind of what that was like, actually. We now have InfoPath. Well, that used to be a server technology. It's just baked in. Project Server was an entire server platform. That's a service app. Fast search? Oh, it's just a service app now. See, every one of these was essentially a standalone product. You want to know logical technical architecture, you've got to go through and learn every service application you're going to implement on its own, independently, before you can even think about putting them together in an architectural design. That makes sense? Otherwise, it's like trying to build a car and I don't understand the pieces of it. You know what you get in the end? Something might be really ugly, but it won't work either. Start with the basics. Get social, get managed metadata, get search, maybe get user profiles up, and be happy with that for 6 months. Then move forward as you learn Project Server, learn it in your dev or QA, and then implement it. Okay, I'm going to try to demystify service application architecture. If you've been on MSDN or TechNet, you've seen a lot of really complicated terminology, and we're going to simplify that, I hope. First, we have this thing called a service instance. By the way, what I did here was create 3 web servers and 3 application servers, kind of in a tiered format to make it simple. Now, we have this thing called a service instance. Sounds complicated. That means we install the software. You with me? So we install SharePoint 20. Then we have this thing even more complicated. It's a service machine instance, and that means we turned it on. Okay, so now a service application needs to have 1 or more service machine instances. So if I have 1 service machine instance for a service application, let's say it's search, and it stops, will search work? No. If I have 2 service machine instances and one of them fails, will it still work? Yes. For this reason, in 2013, we almost always put servers in pairs. I don't mean pear-shaped, I mean pairs, like as in 2. Any service that's critical, which in SharePoint, services are very critical, make sure you have at least 2 service machine instances. Now, they have at least 1 database. They don't have to, though. There's some service applications that don't have a database. Now, here's where the magic comes in. What I'm showing you here is essentially the architecture of managed metadata service. Unfortunately, every other service application was written differently. But generally, this is the way it works. So the web application connects to the service application proxy and says, where is my services? So let me walk you through an Excel services example. Johnny Joe or Barbara Jane comes in a web application, and they're an Excel services web part, and they say, I need to see this web part rendered. Well, that web application goes to an associated service application. Remember, I'll show you that in a second. Proxy, and then proxy knows where to find it down here in the services tier. Actually, what the proxy's doing is caching all the information in the registry in that box to tell it where to find it. That's really what most proxies are doing. It's really not a lot of magic going on under the hood, and how this box will find the service tier. Okay? All right, good thumbs up so far. So let me show you this. Once again, don't make this hard. There's less black magic going on here than you would think. Now, if I go in here to System Setting, Services on Services, we saw this earlier. Oh, I showed you Microsoft SharePoint Foundation Web Application. Is that a service machine instance? No, it's just a SharePoint service. What about Microsoft, I don't know, Excel services, Excel calculation services? Is that a service machine instance? Yes. So see here in this single list, some of these are just SharePoint services. Some of these are instances of a certain larger service application. This is where I go turn those instances on or off. I go to the top, I go to the server I'm looking for, and I turn on that instance. Now, if I did that on 2 boxes, I would then have 2 Excel services instances. One of them could die, Excel services continues to work. This is foundationally how we get scalability and high availability in farm architecture. The other thing we get, open up IIS Mangler. Go to any box. Let me go over to my app server. And let's open up IIS. You ever seen this website down here called SharePoint Web Services? You ever wonder what that does? A couple things. First thing I'm going to show you is this topology service. And the ports are 328.3 and 328.44, by the way, and they're always that on every single farm you ever build. It's the same thing. And this is your topology service for another farm trying to figure out where a service proxy is finding out where a service lives. It's going to ping here. It's going to find the information. It's going to copy it to the box. See all these other GUIDs here? Because you guys said you were GUIDs. I'll give you a tip. Highlight it, change the content view, and I can now see the service. That is Excel service. So if I were to connect to this box on port 32844 and this GUID web service, what would I be leveraging? Excel services. See, it's not magic. I'm just simply this server. Now, what if I had my web server disconnected from my application server by a firewall and I was blocking 32844? How well is that going to work? Not well at all, will it? So be very careful whether it's a host-based firewall, it's a router, it's whatever, blocking ports. We have a lot of traffic going on between these servers. This is the way this thing works. You know, that's Excel services, there's my profile, there's my subscription settings, there's my managed metadata web services. You want to see something really cool? Okay, I know you do. This is my Excel services on App01. So let's go over here on App02. Let's go to Excel calculation services. See it started? Okay. Now we said that was 155.1D99005. And what if I stop Excel calculation services? And by the way, it's really not genuine. It says it shouldn't take long, and sometimes it takes minutes. I've been really kind of disappointed in that. I just feel like I was lied to. And now if I refresh this right here, it's gone. Now you see. With me? When we go over to services on server and we turn on and off a service machine instance, it's turning on or off one of these web services here to communicate with the rest of the farm. Not rocket science. Now, some of these service machine instances aren't just a web service. Some of these are a Windows Server service. Once again, I love this because we just start typing services. Voila. On this one, for example, we'll see search server. So there's instances of the search service application that are running as Windows Server services. So 2 places your service machine instance can live. It should always live as a web service on the box you turn it on. So on App02, I turn it on, I should see that GUID show up. But some of them also have a Windows Server service. User profiles is another good example of that. See, I told you more fun than you should have on I don't know, I just flew internationally. What is it, Tuesday? Tuesday. Now let's talk a bit about the workflow, because who installs SharePoint 2013 but doesn't install workflow? I don't know the answer. I thought maybe you did. So when I do an upgrade from 2010 to 2013, essentially those timer job-based workflows will continue to run, and they're still timer job-based. The problem with timer job-based workflows was what? About 1 in 200 didn't fire no matter what. It was basically acknowledged behind the scenes, but it really wasn't a great workflow technology. It was all OWS timer-based. So what we've done in 2013 is we now can create a workflow management server farm that we wire into our farm, our SharePoint farm. Now, your upgraded workflows will continue to work as timer jobs. And in fact, the UI is going to come up and show you, would you like to create a 2010 workflow based on timer jobs, or would you like to create a 2013 based on a proper workflow service? Now, I don't want to scare you off because the workflow management farm is technically 2 server farms, but it's actually quite easy to set up. It actually is easy. You can actually set it up and not know what you just did. It's that easy. And I'm not saying that's good, but it is that easy. The biggest thing to know is once I've installed my workflow management farm on these other 2 servers in my network somewhere, I then have to run a command, install software on each web front end to communicate to those servers. And that's how we communicate workflows. Real world, do we want to have to add 2 more servers to our farm? Most of us don't. We said we're barely using the 2 application servers we have. So here's the good part. You can actually install the workflow management services on your SharePoint application servers, leverage the same SQL server, and create another farm and communicate. So you can server share. Just know that technically they're not connected. You're just sharing the same box. I'm not saying it's a good practice, bad practice, mediocre practice. It's just you can do it. Real world, I'm not Microsoft. Look, I get real world, a customer gives me six boxes total and a ridiculous amount of requirements and say, get everything to work on them. And I just threw here just for fun. I pulled this primarily off. Is this primarily off Technic, Daniel, or did you edit some of this? It's essentially TechNet. Daniel Webster's down here. He's got the big gray beard, not a lot of hair. You can see it's kind of shiny right there in the front row. He wrote a lot of the search stuff for a lot of the Microsoft books and so forth. And I pulled this slide out of some work him and I were doing for a chapter in a book. This is the basic search architecture in SharePoint 2013. Are you with me? This is the most basic architecture. We now have to decide where all of these are going to live in our farm. Am I trying to scare you about search in 2013? Well, that would be yes. Because I believe that 2013 is one of the driving factors in what your architecture looks like in 2013. It is by far the largest consumer of CPU and memory, is what we're finding already. The same basic drawings on TechNet without Daniel's cool touches on it. Unfortunately, I can't talk about search. There's another search session here today and tomorrow. I would go grab it. Let's just go take a look at the search service application, just for fun. You know, I have a hard time staying out of the UI. So application manglement, managed service applications. I'm sure I have one called, search service application. Now, here's the same thing they did, it's kind of dodgy, they did in 2010. If you click beside the name and highlight it, I can now go to the fluid or the ribbon and edit properties about the service application. But if I click on the URL itself, I go into the service application and manage it. By the way, it's really hard to write that in a book and describe the difference of those two. You have to use lots of pictures and arrows. And here we can see the topology. Now, in 2010, remember, we had a little button in here we could come click and say, change my farm topology. 2013, you'd change that by opening up PowerShell, run as admin. It's not terribly complex. We've got some scripts. If you get the new Sam's book, I'll have it in there. Everything Daniel and I, we put it all in there. You'll be able to just type it out. It should be out hopefully in 6-8 weeks. That's how my kids are going to college too, by the way, universities, so help me out. Now, here's what you got to choose. When you build a farm, I've got index partition, query processing, analytics, content crawler, admin. I have to choose on which servers in the farm those are going to live. We said we're going to add everything in pairs. So what that means is I really need 2 servers running each of those functions to have a highly available search farm. Ooh. But I have 2 web front ends and 2 app servers. What am I doing with this? Well, this is where we're getting creative. We're seeing in early installations where they're not super, super busy. Things like the crawlers we're putting out on the web front ends. You know, we'll put the admin content processing analytics query maybe on the 2 application servers. And that kind of works up to, I can make up some numbers here, so I'm going to make up some numbers. That'll kind of work to maybe 500,000 items. And then somewhere between there and 1 million, you're going to have to start adding servers to the farm. Do you agree with that, Webster? So if you're going to really start crawling file shares and stuff, you're going to have to, you won't get away with 4-server farm. That's what I'm getting at. If you want to crawl 5 million items, you're going to add 2 more servers. You're going to a 6-server farm, not including SQL, 2013. That's just, welcome to 2013 search. Now, it gives us lots of cool functionality. We can crawl millions of items, and we have query rules. And did you know search scopes are completely gone? That get your attention. Go to the search session. Scopes are gone. See ya. If you upgraded, you have them. Otherwise, they're all gone. All right, let's go back over here to the handy-dandy PowerPoint slide deck. So what do we do in the end? And I just pulled out one of our clients, and I didn't even pull out an accurate one now that I look at it closer. This is kind of how we're representing it. It's e-size drawings now because there's so many services and service instances going on, but this is how I've chosen to represent it with clients. Here's a 4-server farm to give you an idea with 2 web front ends and 2 app servers, and here's all my databases down here. And here's kind of where I've turned on instances of services. That's a lot going on, isn't it? Now, obviously, you know, I want to make this clear. Most of these apps can't really be leveraged by users much, or this won't work. But usually, Access Service isn't heavily used. Excel Services isn't heavily used. Visio Service isn't heavily used. If I were to get 5 of these service applications heavily used, this won't work. You're simply going to 6 servers. We said 80 gig system drive, something 4 logs, and 4 core 64-bit. So you're adding 2 significant servers to your farm. Now, I could come in. This is just one of Daniel's search service application architecture. This was a client who said, we've got to scale out a little bit for search. Look at the search. This is just the search services config. We're not even into Excel services. So I'm serious. When we're talking about going in and learning each service application individually before I install the whole, dead serious. Because if you can't sit down on paper and at least on a napkin with a couple beers be able to draw this out, you're in trouble. It's not something, search isn't something you're just going to, I agree, next, finish. There is really no default. Well, I guess there is. Everything's on one server by default. That won't work. But the default is it installs everything on one box. Look at that, exactly on time. So thank you for attending. I'll hang out for a bit. We're going to do performance tomorrow. So what we're going to do tomorrow is go through and test all of this using a really cool testing tool for administrators. Thank you very much.